Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. To be honest, more people than I thought would show up to a talk that has AI in the title. My name is Marlon Fussell. I'm a game designer at Martian Lawyers Club, and I'm going to be presenting Growth in Progress, Harnessing AI to Make Your Game Feel Alive. And before I get started, I've been told if everyone can silence their cell phones or anything else that makes noise. And you'll also be sent a survey. I've been stressed the importance of filling this survey out, so you better do it. Before I get into it, I'm going to start off with an introduction, like most things. Then I'm going to go into discussing some reasons as to why I think AI is an interesting technology to implement in video games. Then talk about a game called GUG I've been working on for the past 2 years and how we put these ideas into action. Then discuss a few design principles we started to establish and work with to help us work with this technology. And then I'm going to go over a few current notable problems that we faced about the chaotic nature of working with AI. And then hopefully it all ends. A little bit about me first, though. About 8 years ago, I started a tabletop games company called Mega.Marlon, where I designed and published tabletop card games and board games. 2 years ago, my brother Levi and I started a meetup group called Bristol Indie Developers, where we run monthly playtest parties to get devs games in front of the public to receive playtesting feedback, as well as teach the public about the thriving Bristol game scene. On top of that, every 6 months, I like to participate in the Ludum Dare Game Jam and make games. That'll make more sense in just a second. But then finally, 2 years ago, along with Levi and our friend Common, we set up Martian Lawyers Club. And this is a video game studio that revolves around using AI in video games in interesting ways. So about 4 years ago, in 2021, a little just before the big explosion and hype of AI, Levi and I made a game for the Ludum Dare called Arterial. And the best way to think about this is it's kind of like the Library of Babylon, but instead of books, it's an infinite procedurally generated art gallery. The player wanders around, gets lost, but collects paintings to bring back and curate a selection of art. And in order to make this, we used a local large language model to generate the art in real time. And at the time, we thought this was really freaking cool. Now I think most people kind of look at this and roll their eyes and think all you did was generate artwork. But for us, we thought there's something here, and maybe there's more to it than that. And then fast forward to about 2023. At Martian Lawyers Club, we released our first little mini project. It was a web browser game called Starships TV. And the best way to think about this is it's kind of like Asteroids, but it's an auto battler. You pick a ship from your hangar, and you watch it battle another ship. But instead of just picking a ship, you can also pick two ships. And now each ship has two factors to it. It has a form of movement, and it has a weapon. And when you pick two ships, you can combine them together. And we use AI to do this combination. So it would look at both movements of the ships and create a new movement pattern. Or it'd look at both weapons and create a new weapon. And this ended up getting some really weird results. So one of the ships you might see shot bullets that kept splitting and then splitting and splitting until the game inevitably crashed. Or we had one that just teleported itself out of bounds like that and just died. But within all of these weird ones, we got really creative ideas we would have never thought of. So for instance, we had a ship that would just shoot a really tiny short stream of bullets to the point where it almost created a sword, a little melee weapon, and its movement pattern was to get as close to the other ship and touch it. And Starships TV wasn't around for very long. The domain name is now expired, so you actually can't scan to play it. But within that time period, and very little people playing it, we got nearly 700 unique ships in this game. And that's a fair bit of content for a game that none of you have heard about. And then finally, GUG. GUG is a game we've been working on for a little over 2 years now. It's a roguelike creature battler. And the core premise is the player can type whatever they want to make any creature they want. And before I get too in-depth about it, I'm going to talk more about it in a bit. So we'll move on to the first part. And the first part is why I think AI is actually an interesting technology to implement into a game. And to be upfront, I'm looking at this through a design lens. I don't have a technological background. I've never trained a model. I don't really understand how the technology works to an in-depth extent. I've always relied on Levi to do that part. But I've worked with this technology in a game sense and had to design with the chaotic nature with it. And these are kind of some reasons and interests that I've seen. And I've seen a lot of people currently push AI as a cheap, easy way to produce content, or maybe replace people or reduce costs. And I think there's a little bit of truth to this. For instance, in GUG, it's a roguelike, so every time you die, you start over. And we wanted it that whenever the player started a run, they were hit with a little intro narrative text. But then every time they died, they were hit with an outro narrative text. And we wanted them to be related, but we wanted a lot of these, so that every time the player started it, we could build the world when they read one of these. And instead of writing it, we decided we would generate 1,000 of these and pre-populate a database, and it only took us a day. And it worked, but I feel like it's a really uninteresting use of this technology. And I feel like there's more to it than just that. And as game designers, a big part of our creation is we rely on the knowledge that players already have before they start playing our game. And that could be them playing other games or just the world around them. Like, we never really explain to a player what attack is. That most players know attack deals damage, and we don't even really have to explain what damage is. It's kind of an inherent part of being a game player. And I think a really good example is the Baldur's Gate 3 character creation screen. Now, this is one of the first screens you're hit with in the game. And to everyone in this room, this makes a lot of sense. We see that it says class at the top, right? So we're probably going to assume there's a tab where we get to pick our race. Under class, we see phrases like barbarian, warlock, and wizard. These are all terms we're familiar with. But if you were to give this screen to someone like my dad, right, who has trouble to just wall run in most video games, he's going to completely shit himself, right? He's going to go onto YouTube. He's going to start watching videos about what he's supposed to do. And then probably 3 hours into his run, he's going to regret his decision because he's learned more information about the world of Baldur's Gate. And that brings me to my first of 3 reasons, which is I think AI is an interesting technology because it creates an ease of accessibility. We players interact with our games through a lot of standard controls, right? We're familiar with buttons, joysticks, mice, keyboards. We even have motion controls. And a lot of this evolution of how players can interact with our games is on a hardware side of things. Even got the little crank on a Playdate. But very rarely is this on a software side of things. That's a much tougher problem to solve. But through AI now, we can give it a photo, and it can actually examine the contents of that photo, look at it, and give us a custom output based off of that. Or we can now look at the F key over the J key, and before it would be what the designer decided to do the key bindings for. But the F key now has its own individuality. It represents the letter F. We can look at that and give a custom result to that over just the J key. So if we go back to our Baldur's Gate 3 screen, you could see it being a much more accessible screen if you had a box that just said, what would you like to be? And now someone like my dad can come along. They don't need to learn about all these stats in Baldur's Gate. They could type whatever they want it to be. And that would create them a fully custom character based off of interests they already have, and give them probably create mechanics based off those interests. So it's an easier accessible game. And it brings us to the second point, which would be custom tailored experience, right? The player now has this tailored experience because they've put in a little bit of themselves in the game, and it relates to them. And you could see players creating hundreds or thousands of these unique characters in a game that they can all explore and interact with. And that brings us to the final point of why I think AI is interesting to implement in a game. When you have these thousands of unique different characters, there's pretty much the potential for unlimited learning on a player side. And learning, as we know, is pretty much the core aspect to keeping a player engaged with your game. So I know these reasons sound kind of fantastical, right? Like a game where you have this ease of accessibility, you can create this perfectly tailored experience to the player, and then they have unlimited learning potential upon that. And that's why I now want to talk about GUG. So GUG is a roguelike creature battler. We've been working on it for 2 years now. And this isn't just a tech demo. This is a game that's been player-facing. It's a demo on Steam for past 6 months. We've had over 30,000 players engage with it, and we put these kind of core ideas to the test. Before I get started, though, a little background on GUG. This right here is a GUG. It's a little squishy, anthropomorphic, morphological ball that has the ability to alter its own anatomy. And that's the core mechanic to GUG. The way the rest of the gameplay works is you have the lane-based combat similar to a game like Inscription, but you have this creature collecting and team building mechanic, which is similar to the Pokemon video games. And then finally, your evolution mechanic, as if it's been ripped straight out of a game like Scribblenauts. And here's a little example of how the transcend mechanic in GUG works. And now transcend is what we call evolving. So the player drags the GUG, they can type whatever they want. Here they've typed in queen. And in return, we give them a fully unique image, name, stats, and effect based off what they type. So the effect here says spawn 2 night GUGs. And now this isn't all aesthetics. We generate code in real time to give this effect full functionality. So now the player can drag their GUG to the open space, and because there's only one other space, it'll spawn 1 night GUG next to it, and then they'll hit the go button, attack the enemy GUG, and just absolutely annihilate them. And the kind of key premise for GUG now is players will travel the world, assembling this team of weird, wacky creatures, typing whatever they want, and getting just results they could never predict. And this, of course, has given us a lot of unique GUGs that we wouldn't have even expected in the game. So I pulled some GUGs that we've gotten from players on our Discord server, just to kind of show you the large variety of effects that we can get from using this technology. So the first one's really simple. All it does is it spawns a horse companion, and at the end of the round, it heals 1 health if that horse companion's still alive. We get some weird ones. This one's Big Bill. He rewrites all effect text to just say Big Bill in letters. You have to kind of remember what your effect does, but it's just going to now say Big Bill. This one is one of those ambiguous ones you have to learn by playing, which was put this GUG in timeout for duration of next round. And that created a little bit of excitement of what's this GUG going to do. Then we got some real strange ones. People started to realize you could get them to ask you questions. So this one asked you a random science question. It created a pop-up, and if you answered it correctly, you got a positive. And if you answered it incorrectly, a negative effect. And an example of a player got one who asked him pottery questions, and his run got screwed over because he knew nothing about pottery. We also got them another weird one. You type in Wordle. It gives you an input box, and you've got to guess the 5-letter word it's generated, and then it gives you +2 attack if you get it correct. It's nearly impossible. And then we get some real simple overpowered ones. Just kill all foes, or increase its attack and health to maximum. When a number gets so large in the game, it doesn't even matter. So we just give them 3 exclamation marks. And then finally, my favorite one, this one triggers if the player loses the game, and it simply is convert loss to a win. And now we get all sorts of GUGs. We have a lot of GUGs. And to put this in comparison, a game like Slay the Spire has over 700 cards. And Pokemon, a little over 1,000 creatures. Yu-Gi-Oh! 12,000-ish unique cards, and then the biggest of them all, Magic the Gathering, has 27,000 unique cards. GUG, which has been a demo on Steam for just 6 months, has over 356,000 unique creatures. So this is pretty cool. On a surface level, I mean, a player can type what they want, and they get a custom response. And inherently, that's fun. But I think there's a little more to it than just that. If we go back to our first slide, ease of accessibility. In GUG, like most games, we get players of diverse backgrounds that come in and play it. We get those RPG players who come in and they type in something real generic like warrior. Or one of our most popular phrases is AoE healing. And now that's a real niche phrase that most gamers understand, but people outside of that scope have no idea what that means. Like my mom wouldn't know what AoE healing means. But she can still engage in GUG by typing what interests her. So she'd probably type in something like doilies. And now my mom can play GUG along with this player who's into RPGs. They can still have an engaging experience that's tailored to what they like. And as a designer, this is really helpful because no longer do I have to make sure I've set the player up to have a full understanding of my game before I can let them loose. And the player no longer feels like they need a full understanding of the game to be able to engage with it in a meaningful way. They just have to bring content, knowledge of the world that they have around them into GUG, and GUG works itself around it to make it functional within the game. And now going back to this, although I see this as more kind of than just 356,000 unique GUGs, to me, this is 356,000 unique tailored experiences to each player. Each one of these was typed in by someone, it related to them, and in return, they got a GUG based off their interests. And before I wrap it up on not the presentation, but on just the GUG case study, I wanted to touch on some interesting design things we noticed. And these are some points of interest. The biggest one was definitely players formed a really strong attachment to their creatures. On every YouTube video or stream or post, everyone always used the phrase "my GUG," and they kept kind of personally associating themselves with the creatures they were making. And we actually started to play into that, and I'll get into that later in some of our design principles. The biggest, another big one, and I've harked on this for a little bit now, was players just can create GUGs that relate to them. And I would watch people type in characters that I had no idea what they were. They're like some anime characters, but it created a response that they found funny and related to them, and it was something we would have never been able to predict. An initial concern we had early on was, would players get overwhelmed at the prospect of too much infinite content? You don't really hear about creature collectors where you can't collect them all. So we thought maybe they would get tired, but that was not the case at all. This is just one user, and this is as many as I could fit on this slide, who started posting their collection, and they wanted to explore the entire GUG-scape, basically. So they started creating these binders of creatures and posting them on the Discord. And that was because, well, our last point is they never found them to be repetitive. In every GUG creation, there was always a unique aspect that a player enjoyed, whether that was a interesting image they got in return, or they got some sort of funny effect or overpowered effect, or maybe something that was stupid, but they just wanted to share it. Or maybe the name was interesting. And these are just a few of the varieties of different images players started to post to show the different unique creatures that they could make. And then finally, the feedback we've received so far in the demo. So by far, the biggest positive that we keep hearing players say is they really enjoy the creature creation aspect. They like typing in anything and getting something in return that is functional. And on top of that, they love kind of the chaotic sandboxing nature that some of these effects bring. But then on the other side of that, of course, some of our biggest negative feedback is the chaotic sandboxing nature that these elements bring. Combined with on top is the fact that we use AI. A lot of some players didn't like that. And then moving on to the third part, these are some design principles that we started to establish from working on GUG and working with the chaotic nature of this technology. So I have 8 of them here that I wanted to share. The first one is one that we established pretty much before we even started working on GUG. And a game that kind of inspired this motto was Noita, which can be a very chaotic game. And our first principle was to embrace the chaos. We knew using this technology, it's chaotic to begin with, so we would create a game that had that level of chaos. And from the get-go, we decided it's a single-player roguelike. We wanted it to be a roguelike because we knew players would die in random, crazy ways and need to restart quickly and get back in that loop. Or they might encounter a situation where they wanted to restart and get going again. And it's also single player because, as you saw, there were some abilities that automatically win you the game. And in a single player setting, that's kind of funny, but you could see in like a multiplayer PvP setting, it's not that funny if you just happen to go second. Our second principle was we set hard rails. And these weren't rails to kind of restrain that chaos. We definitely didn't want to do that. But these were to prevent the player from accidentally breaking the game. And by that, this is some early playtest footage because it's an issue we experienced early on. And in GUG, when you attack an empty lane, little individual coins drop on the battlefield based off of your GUG's attack. And now most GUGs have about 5 attack, but the player got 10,000 attack here. And it took a really long time to load 10,000 individual coins. And later on, they get 1,000,000 attack and the game just crashes. So we set these little hard rails. Some other really big ones we set were effects can only trigger in the battlefield during a battle and can only affect what the player sees on the battlefield. We could let them trigger in the shop and in other places, but it would be really confusing to the player if they went back to the main menu screen and a GUG had deleted the start game button. Our third principle was the first choice we wanted players to make was to utilize our character creation technology. And back in GDC 2 years ago, we were showcasing the game, and you played the game for 10 minutes before you got to this point, because we thought players needed to have an understanding of the game before they could create a character. And as I brought up earlier, that's not the case, because players can just bring in a part of themselves to make a character. And we realized because players build that strong emotional connection, if the very first thing they do is make a creature, it had a lot stronger of a rate in which they would stick with the game, because they've now made this creature. They want to see where it goes. They want to take it through that journey and hopefully keep it alive. And the other kind of second, more minute reason is a lot of players didn't believe we had this technology in a game or is in a working fashion. So they wanted to load up the game, and the first thing they wanted to do was make a creature. And because of that, we could allow them to do that. Our fourth principle, and this is probably by far the biggest one that we ended up making, was we cached our generations. And by this, I mean, when you create a GUG, say you type in the word fire, it generates you a brand new GUG. But from then on, fire always relates to that GUG. So if you type fire in again, you'll get the same GUG. And this is a shared database. So if someone else types in fire, they get that GUG. If I type in fire, it's the same one. And we had 4 real big reasons as to why we did this. And the first 2 were on a technological level. It costs us money to generate these GUGs. So every time we generate one, we're paying money. But if we cache them, we're no longer paying money. We can just pull it from a server, and we've reduced our costs greatly. And the second one was it takes about 10 to 15 seconds to make a GUG. And that's not that long of a wait time. But if you're making GUGs in quick succession, it starts to feel a little bit like a slog. So if we can pull them from a database, it's instantaneous and the player no longer needs to wait. And to put that in perspective, with the amount of GUGs we have now, we get about a 70% cache hit, which means only every 3 in 10 GUGs, the player's going to have to wait 10 seconds, and it doesn't really bother them. The other 2 reasons are on a design side. So the first reason was basically learnability. Before we added this, players struggled to deal with the chaos. Every time they created a GUG, they didn't know what they would get. But in a roguelike, it's really important that they can pull from past runs and help themselves in this run. So if they learned fire GUG has this effect, I can utilize that to help me in this run. And they can start to learn the scape of GUGs in the database and use it to help them in runs. And then finally, we're shareability. If you go on any YouTube video about GUG, you'll see all the comments are people just saying, try this keyword, and someone else saying, no, those ones suck, try these ones instead. And it really got people talking about the game and sharing their creatures with each other. Our 5th principle was we wanted to utilize our content in all aspects. About halfway through our game, we realized, well, the creature creation mechanic is so fun, it makes everything else just feel real boring. And all people wanted to do was make GUGs, but not actually engage with the game itself. So we realized, well, we have this whole pool of GUGs, so we made it every time you enter a shop, you're going to pretty much see one of these custom GUGs from the database. And then that made it so when you entered a shop, you still had that same excitement. What am I going to see? Oh, that's a GUG I've never seen before. Or, hey, that's one I made yesterday and it's in the shop. That's kind of cool. And then we managed to get that excitement and bring that into the battle encounter by making it so that every time you see an enemy GUG, that's a GUG another player's made. Which means every time you start up a battle, you have the excitement of what am I going to see, but also the excitement of I need to learn about this GUG and develop a new strategy to fight it. And because you load up a battle and you're going to see something new, that goes back to our 3rd point from earlier, pretty much unlimited learning potential. Because the scope of the database is growing every time anyone plays the game, you're never going to be able to play it faster than the amount of GUGs that gets created. Our 6th principle was simple inputs with big results. You see a lot of these AI games out there that are mainly like text-based dungeon crawlers, and they just let you type in anything. And we had this with Starships TV, the web game we made. And before we had the crafting mechanic, it was you could just type in whatever you wanted. And it gave players a lot of analysis paralysis. They started panicking. They're like, what am I supposed to type? Am I supposed to describe my ship? Is it the visuals? Is it the weapon? What do I do? And for GUG, we've capped it. You can't type more than 20 characters. Because at the end of the day, the typing isn't the fun part. And that made it so players would just type in anything because they couldn't overtype, hit enter. But in return, we didn't just ask for text to give them text. We gave them a lot in return. They get that unique image, they get a custom name, they get the stats, and they get that functional effect. The reward is much greater than the time and input that they had to put in to create that. So they get the excitement, right? Because at the end of the day, the excitement is what you get, not the typing. Our 7th principle is players will break your AI. I don't know why this sometimes throws people off. But I think a real good case study of this one is about 3 months ago, Fortnite put Darth Vader in the game. And this time he was a little different. He was on the battlefield, and you could go up to him and you could use voice chat to talk to him. And in return, they said he could give you like answer questions about the Empire, give you Fortnite battle strategies. But I mean, we all know the first thing that we would probably want to do, or most players would want to do, and is to try to get him to say something like dick face, right? Because that's kind of funny. And that's exactly what happened. A streamer got him to say the word fuck straight away on stream, and then Fortnite had to patch it out. And in Fortnite's case, it makes sense, right? The game's for a younger audience. But I think as a player, right, it doesn't make sense to throttle the technology because you may as well not be using it. And if I'm a player and I realize, well, you've throttled it so hard, I know I'm no longer going to get that custom tailored experience. That is the point of using this, that I don't really want to engage with it anymore. And then finally, this one is probably my biggest gripe, but I think this technology is interesting if you can use it to embellish what is already fun. So you get a game like Pokemon, and the evolution mechanic, whether you had AI in it or not, is fun, right? You have the excitement of, what am I going to get from this evolution? Or if you already know, you have the excitement of, I've been working towards this creature and I can add it to my team. And you see all the time these kind of like RPGs where people stick AI NPC dialogue into it, and it doesn't make sense because like when I go up to the shopkeeper, I don't care about conversing with the shopkeeper. I'm there to buy an item and get back into the gameplay and enjoy the combat. And it's not embellishing something that most people find exciting. That's normally one of the kind of unexciting or drudgery parts that you find in these RPGs. So here's a list of all the principles. I can leave it up for a second if anyone wants to take a photo. Oh, wow, look at that. A lot of photos. And then to kind of wrap it up, these are some current notable problems we faced. And these are just either, I mean, issues we faced in our journey, or ones we still haven't solved, or things we haven't seen people talk about that much. And I'm just kind of bringing them up. I don't necessarily have solutions for them. And the biggest one to start off with, I think in this room we're all familiar with it, but most of these LLMs use data that they're trained on without the consent of people who've created it. And that's not just digital artists. That's pretty much everyone in this room. If you've put something online, it's probably within some of these data sets and has been trained on. And it's tough to make a game like GUG without using these powerful models. You do have some open source ones, but they're not quite there yet. And the second one is AI can cost a lot. And for GUG, we managed to cache our generation so we could get around this a little bit. But even creating that number of GUGs has still cost us about $20,000, which could be considered cheap, but I think for some teams that might be a fair bit of money to invest into a game, especially when there's almost no end to how much you technically could spend. The third problem that exists is going back to that Darth Vader situation, which players will always find a way to create content that delineates from your game. And if that's a part of your experience, then it's perfectly fine. But say you're making like a really serious story-driven game and you want players to have a very precise experience, I wouldn't put this technology anywhere in that game because they're gonna find a way to get out of it and make something that may not be your intended result. Another issue we've faced in GUG, and I don't think we've solved this perfectly, but we've done a pretty good job at it, is because you are always seeing creatures that are new, the player's always having to learn. And because of that, combined with the unpredictable gameplay, like we can get a GUG that adds 1,000 stats to a single tooltip. You need really frickin' good UI to make this feel like a seamless experience and not a drag for the player to engage with. So I think that's a real big struggle that we faced, was making it so players didn't just stop reading abilities because there was too much going on the screen. And then this one I find is more on a psychological side, but is real interesting. And it goes back to Starships TV. So in Starships TV, when a player made a ship that no one had ever made before, they got a little gold star next to it. But that meant whenever they made a ship that didn't have a gold star, someone else had made it before them. And no matter how good that ship was, they never wanted to play it. So in GUG, we didn't show them ownership because we wanted to keep that strong connection between the player and the my GUG. But our biggest requested feature is people wanting to know, did I make a GUG first? Has someone made this before me? And they wanted to know all this data. And as much as we wanted to show it to them, we were worried about creating that strong connection that players created with their GUG. So it'd be interesting if there was a way you could show them that data, but still keep that connection. But it was something that we could never quite figure out on our side. So we just went with the safe option and didn't show any ownership. And then finally, the kind of biggest issue that we faced, and I think it's still a problem that we do face, was having players believe the technology worked and then prompting them to be creative. And this is two separate issues, but there's a pretty big overlap between both of them. Most players, well, not most players, but we had players who would sit down and they would just type in something generic like John. And because of that, they would kind of get a generic effect in return. And then they maybe assumed that maybe we're just pulling effects from a database and doing a closest matching kind of thing. Or they thought, well, it doesn't really matter what I type, and they kept typing in boring things. And they would fall off a lot faster than if someone had a more exciting first experience with creating a creature. So I think this is two issues to this. I think, first of all, it's a framing problem to get the player to be creative. But I also think it's an issue from players not having a lot of experience using this technology or seeing it in the case of a game. And I have an example down below here. This is an online game called Jazz versus Waffles, and it's a really fun game, so I recommend you check it out. But in it, you can type whatever you want. And again, you get a character, and you fight another character in a JRPG-style combat. But what's really cool is this is their input box, and it's constantly filling itself out with creative ideas. So one of them is a cyborg with a Chicago accent. And as soon as a player sees that, they realize, oh, I can type more than just John. I can start getting creative with my ideas and typing anything. And at the bottom, they frame it really well. They basically straight up tell you the game's AI will use your input to create a unique character for you to play. And I think that's a good way to frame it because you're telling the player straightforward. So this is a good solution to that problem, and it's probably something I'd try to do next time. And then to wrap it all up, as designers, we talk a lot about design constraints breeding creativity. That could be a timeline constraint, or maybe it's even a restricted color palette we've got to work with. And you hear that AI has a lot of issues, and it's either maybe you got artifacts in your AI, or it's too costly, and then everyone tries to solve it on a technological side, right? They think, well, let's reduce the amount of tokens we're using to reduce costs. And I don't know why people don't see AI's issues as just more design constraints, right? Interesting problems that we as designers can either work with or try to solve. Like we came up with the caching on a design side so that we could reduce costs, but it opened up the path to being able to pull from that database and give players that unlimited learning potential in battles. And I think AI is a really interesting technology, again, to embellish what is fun, but I think for the love of God, just stop implementing AI for the sake of implementing AI. And that's my presentation. And I think we have a microphone for some questions. I don't know what the time is, but we have 10 minutes of questions.
Hi.
Hello.
I really enjoyed your talk. I had a question for you with regards to a very important element of roguelikes, which is like the high peaks, right? So in Binding of Isaac, you only get like very strong items occasionally, or in Spelunky, at some point, a series of explosions off screen will actually kill you. But all of these things tend to be like quite reduced for the player experience. In a world where you let players freely choose what GUG they start with, how do you try to like incentivize them to play a more balanced gameplay?
Yeah, so the question was basically about how do we balance having the ability for a player to type in instant win and win the game. And again, this is sold from a design perspective. We could throttle this on the AI side, but we do a little bit of rubber banding. Basically, if the player makes a GUG, that can now appear in their run, and they'll inevitably come across it. So if you type in that instant win, well, it might help you in a short term, but in a long term, that's a GUG you're going to have to come across. And it's also, on top of that, we have different battles with different win conditions. So say you do create that GUG that gives you like an infinite amount of attack. Well, you might come across like a boss battle or a situation where you have to rescue a GUG and protect it from dying. So they're interesting, but we created the game so that it always has to keep players re-strategizing and making the whole kind of scope of GUGs useful.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, there's one question over there.
Hi. Great talk, by the way.
Thanks.
I wanted to ask about when you've got completely open-ended user-generated content, have you found any, obviously there's a lot of kind of potential for people to bring in, like you said, the real-world context. How do you kind of navigate anything like IP, copyright, brand infringement, right? Like someone types in Darth Vader, for example, and makes a GUG out of this.
Yeah.
How did you find a way to allow for that kind of like inspiration? Players, whilst not then creating, say, like, hey, players can't share any of our content we let them, because if they do, we got Disney coming down or something like that.
Yeah, that's definitely something we talked about a lot in the beginning. So you can type anything you want, right? So you could type Darth Vader, but the image generation we use, it always makes it a GUG, and it always sticks in that style, and it never breaks out of it, really. So if you type in Darth Vader, you're just going to get like a black GUG that's kind of has like red eyes. So the name's not going to be Darth Vader, but it's going to be inspired by it, but still a goopy-ish name. And the effect is something that'll like, it pushes the GUG back, right? Or it deals like 1 force damage. So we've set it up so that it takes this and then it inspires a GUG out of it, as opposed to just straight like ripping Darth Vader and giving it a helmet and all of that. So it's something we worked on quite a bit. But yeah, we wanted players to type anything. And have a result that made sense to what they got without directly being like, this is Darth Vader.
Yeah, really interesting talk. Thank you. My question is how would you, first of all, like, with the AI, it changes the code. So that seems like a very technical perspective. And so I was just saying, like, how would maybe somebody who hasn't got that experience but is still maybe mess around with game development, how would they achieve that? And yeah, just do you have any tips for like how you would even not necessarily implement it, but think, how can I actually apply it to my own game? Because it looks like this game was sort of made with the AI generation from the ground up. So yeah, that's just mainly it.
Yeah. So it's kind of the question was how can I apply this to my own game, but also how did we get the technology to work? From a design side, so yeah, we knew we wanted to do this before we started making GUG. And as far as like the in-depth code generation, that's not really my background. Levi's down here if anyone wants to ask him a question about it afterwards. But we kind of decided each GUG's like a modular rule. So basically, I mean, like in card games, each card's its own rule. And we knew if we could create a little snippet of code, we can just like inject that into the game one at a time, as opposed to just rewriting the game at the whole time. So that's why we went with this approach of doing a card game, because most cards are just like a rule or two, and we can generate the code behind that individually or one at a time and start to evolve the game. And I think at this point, we have far more code written by actual GUGs than we've written ourselves. So I guess that'd be my recommendation is you create a game in which you can insert these modular rules over time.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, do we have a question? Oh, okay, we have 5 minutes left, I think.
Thank you. Really great talk. I
Thanks.
was also wondering about the balancing. So before you were mentioning that there's some rules that prevent you from always winning instantly, but I was wondering if you also implemented some system to keep the game interesting, for example, to keep battles long enough and not just instant win or instant.
Yeah. So the idea is, or the question was, do we have a system to keep battles interesting so that they're a nice length? And we kind of have this door system. So in a lot of games or roguelikes, you complete a battle and then you choose this branching path map of where you want to go next. But we made it so the gameplay on how you play in a battle determines where you go. So you can either run the timer down over a certain amount of rounds and try to stay alive to going to maybe amniotic pool to transcend a GUG, or you can try to win the battle, and it gives you the option of maybe 2 different shop types. So we wanted to also incentivize players to maybe not necessarily winning the battle will get you to the best option, but trying to hold out for as long as possible without dying.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, do we have any other questions?
I missed the beginning of the talk, so you might have covered this already, but is there anything you could tell us about like the illustration side of it and how you've actually developed an AI model that I guess you've based on a lot of illustration input that you've put in and
yeah, so
fix it for you?
Yeah, the question was how we developed an AI model to create the illustrations of the GUGs. And going back to the kind of one of the core issues, the first one was these large LLMs that have been trained on other data. So we actually do use stable diffusion to create the GUG, but we fine-tuned it on about 30 GUGs that we've made to keep it within that style. So it'll always stick within that style and create something that's GUGgy, but it has been using stable diffusion, which is trained on other people's content.
So it wasn't a huge input then? Just
it still, I mean, it still has the knowledge of everything. So it's still pretty much been trained on everything, but the input we gave it is only about 30 GUGs, and that keeps it within a scope. But we're not training these models. We're only kind of restraining it using a fine tune. Yeah, thanks. Do we have a question right here?
Hi, I was thinking about the balancing, but we've had questions about that. So in terms of the learning, have you got any metrics or telemetry showing that players do get better over time?
We have players who kind of, it seems during playtests like they have a click, basically. So we don't have straight up metrics, but there's this point where a player realizes, oh, I can type more than just like +1 attack. And as soon as they hit that click, their mind starts to really get going with, oh, I can type in like, let me try infinite health, and let me try automatic kill. And then they start to realize, well, this is fun for a little bit, but now the interest is, can I get a GUG to ask me quiz questions? And that's why the sandboxy nature then opens up. So there's this point where it starts to click with players, and they start to realize I can do more than just the generic stuff in most games. Cool, is there any other questions? No, okay, cool. I think that's it. Thanks, everyone.